Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Darrow here with another Options in Play video update. So here's a fun one to talk about. Hasn't been a whole lot of a reason to talk about Tilray in the past few months, right? Um, this 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 is a name that's actually come up a lot more over the last couple weeks. Not necessarily just for what Tilray the stock has done, but because a lot of people are comparing Beyond Meat to Tilray back in the fall, right? Remember back in that crazy action in September? So people started throwing around Tilray, um, the Tilray name, because a lot of people are starting to compare Beyond Meat or what Beyond Meat is doing to what Tilray did back in September. So, whether it's a coincidence, right, or maybe just it was time for Tilray, right? It seems like all of like the chatter on the name and how it compares to what Beyond Meat is doing right now has actually positively impacted Tilray, and now Tilray is actually really starting to look quite a bit better, right? And what's fun and what's interesting about this trade is just we haven't really had the opportunity to talk about trending trades too recently because the May move lower and then the June move back higher really like busted up a lot of trends in both directions and like on the downside and then now back up on the upside, right? But Tilray was a trending trade, a really aggressive trending trade on the downside. I mean, you can see once it lost this. I mean, even prior to losing like this low 60 support level right here, right? It was in a pretty steady trend. 8 EMA, and then it was the 20, right? And basically each time it hit one of these moving averages, it basically hit a wall of resistance, and it just kept sinking and sliding. Heavily shorted name, breaking below all sort of support. There was really nothing underneath. So I mean, it was just one thing led to the next, losing support, and then it was the moving averages, and then it was heavily shorted. People were getting out. So the performance was just steadily, steadily negative, lower lows, lower highs, up until the beginning of June, right? Then you had actually a headline which was similar to what you saw in January. Is like one of the major shareholders agreed to extend the lockup period, and so that's what initially got Tilray moving here. So that was this session, and that's when it crossed onto my radar personally, because that was the day that it got through the 8 and the 20, and you can see obviously how significant those two moving averages have been over the last few months, right? So it's a name that like I kind of always have an interest in, but there's not always a reason to be involved with it, right? I mean, it's something like I have on the radar, but if there's no real trade opportunity, just kind of leave it alone. So when it crossed above, I was waiting to see if it held, right? And then it pulled back. Zoom in a little bit further. So it pulled back, and then you could see that the 8 EMA began to turn into support right here. This is all very quick developing, right? So the 8 EMA started to hold as support. Then the 20-day, it started to build a little quick base with the 20-day, and that's when I thought, like, okay, this is actually really starting to get interesting, right? Like it's starting to hold above these key moving averages. Had that little head fake breakdown on this day, then that was a point you're like, like kind of dicey, could reset, and then boom, right back above, and like that. When it got back through the 8 and back through the 20, like that was the trigger, right? I mean, it tried to break down, couldn't, held, got back, and then it's just been off to the races the last couple of days. So now what, right? So now, like, the trending trades, right? When they're in the trend, it's very consistent, low volatility action, right? Like the options tend to be priced too high, right? Because they don't often move as much as you're anticipating because the overall volatility is a lot lower. But when they break these trends, whether it's a trending stock on the upside and breaks to the downside, or in this case, a trending stock trade to the downside that's now breaking to the upside, I feel like the options can oftentimes be underpriced, right? Like the implied volatility is probably too low initially because the stock really hasn't been volatile over like the recent like few weeks, few months, right? So with Tilray, right? The July options just they weren't pricing in that significant of a move because to be honest, it really hadn't done a whole lot, right? It was just kind of like steadily sliding. So now over these last two sessions, you're really seeing implied volatility rocket higher as the stock is rocketed higher. And then today, actually really important also, it cleared the 50-day, and you can see that the 50-day was basically the last line of defense, right? I mean, there's really nothing material above at the moment. Maybe you could argue like 55, the 55 pivot, but really, I mean, it's the 100-day up at 60, which actually almost lines up perfectly with like the back test of like this double bottom from earlier in the year. So that's why like I place so much emphasis on these trending trades, because there's trades like, both directions, right? So like when it's in the trend, there's opportunities, and then once it breaks the trend, there's also opportunities. So even a name like this, when it's like in the trend, maybe you don't want to do anything with it, it's still worth keeping an eye on, just because if you do get these setups where it starts to bust the trend, right, then it can present some really nice opportunities, especially like option wise, because again, when stocks are in these trends, implied volatility is lower, average trading ranges is lower, so the options are priced lower. But then when they begin to bust these trends, the options haven't really like moved enough to reflect that. So you can get some contracts, right? You can get like some positions before that implied volatility really starts to expand again, which is what the TLRY trade idea was. All right. Cool. So wrapping up another busy week. Well, the Fed was really like the highlight of the week, but still kind of like busy just from an overall like trading point of view, and actually probably through next week as well, because we have the G20 next weekend. So probably going to be a lot of headline and a lot of positioning going on into that. So definitely setting up for a pretty busy finish to June, which is historically kind of like a slower month. So it should be interesting. All right, guys. Hope you have a fantastic night. Best of luck if you're playing anything, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.